It is a cold January morning in 1892. We are in the small, rural town of Exeter, Rhode Island. In a snowy graveyard, a group of men stands over an open plot. Among them is a father, George Brown, watching with a heavy heart as his neighbors dig up the bodies of his wife and two daughters. They aren't grave robbers. They aren't criminals. They are a community gripped by a terror so profound that they have turned to the supernatural for salvation. They are looking for a monster. For us, the word vampire conjures images of Dracula and castles. But for 19th century New Englanders, the vampire wasn't a sophisticated count. The vampire was a neighbor, a sibling, or a parent. A deceased loved one who was believed to be feeding on the living from the grave. This is the story of the New England vampire panic. A tragic collision of folklore, fear, and a disease that humanity had not yet learned to conquer. To understand why reasonable people would dig up their relatives, we have to understand the killer they were facing. In the 1800s, it was known as consumption. Today, we know it as tuberculosis. It was a horrifying way to die. The infection attacked the lungs, earning the name the White Plague because it drained the color from the victim's face. They would become pale, hollow-eyed, and slowly, agonizingly waste away, coughing up blood as their body consumed itself. Crucially, because germ theory hadn't fully reached rural America yet, people didn't understand how it spread. They only saw the pattern. One person in a family would die. Shortly after, a brother or sister would begin to wither away, displaying the exact same symptoms. It looked, for all the world, like the life was being drained out of them by an invisible connection to the dead. When science fails to provide answers, humans turn to stories. In the isolated farming communities of New England, a specific piece of folklore took root. The belief was that the first person to die of consumption wasn't fully dead. They believed the deceased was clinging to life in the grave, spiritually draining the vital force from their surviving relatives to sustain themselves. And when these desperate families exhumed the bodies to check, nature often gave them proof. Due to the cold New England ground, bodies decomposed very slowly. If a body was dug up a few months after burial, the skin might still look supple. The gums would recede, making the teeth look longer. But the smoking gun was liquid blood. If the heart or lungs still contained liquid blood, the villagers took this as absolute confirmation that the corpse was a vampire, actively feeding on the living. Once the vampire was identified, the ritual to stop them was visceral and grim. The most common method was to cut open the chest and remove the heart and liver. These organs would then be burned to ash, usually right there in the graveyard. In the most heartbreaking twist of all, these ashes were often mixed with water or tonic and given to the sick relative to drink. Imagine the desperation of a father feeding the ashes of his dead wife to his dying son, hoping against hope that this macabre medicine would break the curse. This happened all over Connecticut, Rhode Island, and Vermont throughout the century. The most famous case, the one that brought the panic to an end, was the one we started with, the Mercy Brown incident. George Brown had already lost his wife and eldest daughter to consumption. Now, his son, Edwin, was dying. Desperate, George allowed the neighbors to exhume the women of his family. His wife and eldest daughter were skeletons, but his youngest daughter, Mercy, who had only been dead for 2 months during winter, appeared too well preserved. There was liquid blood in her heart. The community decided she was the cause of Edwin's illness. They removed Mercy's heart and liver, burned them on a nearby rock, and fed the ashes to her brother. It didn't work. Edwin died 2 months later. The tragedy is that by 1892, doctors in the cities knew what tuberculosis was. A doctor was actually present at Mercy's exhumation, shouting that the liquid blood was just a result of decomposition. But the fear was louder than the science. The vampire panic faded as the 20th century approached and modern medicine replaced folklore. We stopped looking for monsters in the graveyard and started looking for them under microscopes. It is easy to look back at these events and judge these people as superstitious. But if we look closer, we don't see villains. We see terrified families watching their loved ones dissolve before their eyes. The exhumations were gruesome, yes, but they were acts of love. They were the last frantic attempts of people trying to protect the only family they had left. In the end, the New England vampires weren't monsters at all. They were just the victims of a plague, and the tragic scapegoats of a community breaking under the weight of grief.